One thing that makes Mario Kart 8 Deluxe so fun to play is the variety in all 96 of its tracks. Each track has its own theming, layout, music, and shortcuts, but there's also a lot of variety in how long the tracks take to drive. We all have our preferences when it comes to theming, shortcuts, and etc., but what about the lengths of the tracks? Are shorter tracks in general more fun than the longer ones, or vice versa? With this question in mind, I calculated the 10 shortest and 10 longest tracks in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe based on the 150cc world record times, and ranked them on a scale from 1 to 10 to see which ones were better. Before we get into the ratings, make sure you subscribe to my channel to help me reach my goal of 1,000 subscribers before April 2nd. Also, make sure you stick around to the end because the results are not what you would expect. Starting off the short tracks, the 10th shortest track in the game is Riverside Park. Nothing about Riverside Park really stands out to me, but the turns are surprisingly satisfying to drive and the visuals are really good. However, the fact that the optimal strategy for racing it is bagging kind of takes away from what makes this track good. Plus, the layout does feel too short in my opinion. Either way, it's a pretty solid track and I'll give it a 6 out of 10. The 9th shortest track in the game is Moo Moo Meadows. Let's be honest, Moo Moo Meadows is pretty boring. It's basically just a grassy field with really nothing interesting. Plus, the fact that Nintendo decided to put this Wii track in the Shell Cup and leave Toad's Factory out entirely just adds to my distaste for it. At least the track looks nice and the music is catchy, and the lovable cows that walk onto the track are pretty cool. But that's not enough to save this track from a 3 out of 10 rating. The 8th shortest track in the game is Big Blue. I was actually a little surprised to see Big Blue appear on this list, because the way it's packed full of excitement makes it feel longer than it actually is. The 3 unique laps are a blast to race down, with cool shortcuts and intense racing moments, especially towards the end. Racing this track both online and offline in time trials is really fun, and honestly there's not really anything I dislike about this track at all, so I'm giving it a 10 out of 10. The 7th shortest track in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is GBA Mario Circuit. The length of this track actually matters quite a bit when ranking it because my main complaint about it is that it's too short. If there's going to be a track that's as good for bagging as GBA Mario Circuit is, then at least it should be big enough to avoid the constant chaos that takes place, especially on lap 3. Racing it online feels messy and luck-based, but at least racing it on time trials is an enjoyable experience. There are quite a few really cool strats and hidden shortcuts throughout this track, so I'm going to give it a 4 out of 10. The 6th shortest track in the game is New York Minute, the shortest Mario Kart Tour track by a long shot. New York Minute isn't a bad track by any means, but the gloomy vibes and the slippery road really annoy me and it takes away from the racing experience a little. Nonetheless, I really enjoy the city-themed tracks in the Booster Course Pass, and this one is no different. It gets a solid 7 out of 10. The 5th shortest track in the game is Boo Lake. Boo Lake is a solid remake with really satisfying driving and impressive tech throughout the course. It can be pretty chaotic at times when racing online, but most of the time it's just a really fun experience. I will say that I do wish it was a bit longer because it feels too short and cramped a lot of the time, but it's still a really good track and I'll give it another 7 out of 10. The 4th shortest track in the game is Toad Circuit, and let's be honest, who wasn't disappointed when they first played Toad Circuit? This track is a very boring generic track with literally no satisfying techniques, not to mention the graphics are probably the worst in the game. However, I do believe that Mario Kart 8 Deluxe needs simple tracks like this, so it wasn't that horrible of an addition to the Booster Course Pass. I'll give it a 3 out of 10. The 3rd shortest track in the game is N64 Rainbow Road. If you've watched all my videos, you know that I do not like this track at all. It is an extremely boring track with no interesting parts to it whatsoever. Basically just a road that you drive from start to finish. The music and graphics are pretty good on this track, but it still only gets a 2 out of 10. The 2nd shortest track in the game is Donut Plains 3. This track is pretty fun to drive if you're playing on time trials, but in online races it is very chaotic and not very fun at all. Like I said earlier, short bagging tracks are never really a good idea, as it just makes it more chaotic and luck-based. However, I can't bring myself to give Donut Plains 3 that low of a rating because time trialing it is a blast, and I love the music and visuals that go with it. In the end, I'll give it a 5 out of 10. You guys probably saw this coming, but the number 1 shortest track in the game is Baby Park. Most people hate Baby Park because of the overwhelming chaos that it brings, and even though I generally like more peaceful gameplay, I actually do enjoy Baby Park to some extent. I find it pretty fun to zoom around a short 7-lap track, and the chaos it brings is the good kind. However, when you look at the time trial side of things, this is the absolute worst track in the game by far, so I'm going to have to give it a 3 out of 10. After adding up all the ratings for all the courses, the short tracks averaged a 5 out of 10 points. Let's see if the long tracks do better. Moving on to the 10 longest tracks in the game, the 10th longest track is DK Jungle. I really like DK Jungle because it has lots of driving strategies that are difficult but not too difficult, so a player like me can get really good at it with enough practice. The concept of driving through a Donkey Kong themed jungle and even a temple is such a cool one, and Nintendo made it look really awesome. Although there's not really anything I dislike about this track, I don't think it's quite as good as some of the other ones, so I'll give it a 9 out of 10. The 9th longest track in the game is Wario's Gold Mine. The concept of this track is pretty cool, but actually racing on it is pretty boring. There are little to no advanced or satisfying strategies, and driving it is really easy, so it's rare for me to have a super fun time while playing it. There are so many other tracks in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe that are just so much better, so I have to give this track a 4 out of 10. The 8th longest track in the game is Toad Harbor. I was really surprised to see Toad Harbor on this list because it doesn't feel very long when you're racing on it. I think most of that is due to the uniqueness of the layout and how fun it is to play. There are loads of split paths to choose from, and mastering them is a fun challenge. On top of the fun driving this track brings, the concept and atmosphere are also really cool. The busyness of a daytime harbor brings a great racing atmosphere, so I'm giving this track another 9 out of 10. The 7th longest track in the game is Peach Gardens. Although Peach Gardens is one of the simpler tracks, the switch up on lap 3 makes it memorable, and then there are quite a bit of advanced strategies that you can learn throughout the course. It is definitely one of the more solid bagging tracks that this game has to offer. However, the simplicity of it does make it more boring, so I'll give it a 6 out of 10 despite being a very solid track. The 6th longest track in the game is London Loop, and I think it's definitely longer than it needs to be. This track has ridiculously long straightaways and pieces of track that definitely feel unnecessary. I am thankful that it's not a frontrunner because bagging at least adds some excitement. That still can't save this from being one of the worst city tracks with below average music and graphics as well. I'm giving it a 4 out of 10. The 5th longest track in the game is Rock Rock Mountain. Racing Rock Rock Mountain online is kind of ridiculous because the whole race revolves around if you can take the one gigantic shortcut on the 2nd and 3rd lap. Not only that, but the whole track seems really stretched out and longer than it needs to be. The bagging technique and long gliding sections make for little advanced strategies that are necessary to learn in order to do well. At least one good thing is that the graphics and design definitely looks really cool. I'm giving it a 4 out of 10. The 4th longest track is DK Mountain, and man, I am a huge DK Mountain fan. The technicality of the driving on this track makes it very skill-based, but it can also work very well as a bagging track, and it's good to have that option as well. The shortcuts and driving are really fun to learn for both online play and time trials, and the item strategy just adds to the fun in this track. The one thing keeping this from being a 10 out of 10 is how broken it is for online races, so it's getting a 9 out of 10. The 3rd longest track in the game is Waluigi Pinball. Waluigi Pinball is a track that I just can't get behind by any means. There are no shortcuts at all, and the whole track is just way longer than it needs to be. This makes racing it online really boring and not very fun, especially if you're stuck in the back where it's nearly impossible to catch up. Lots of people love the graphics and music on this track, and they are good, but they're not like the best or anything. I'm only giving it a 3 out of 10. The 2nd longest track in the game is Maple Treeway. The concept of Maple Treeway is so cool in my opinion. You start on the floor of an autumn forest before being catapulted into the branches of a tree. The track layout is really fun and the graphics are amazing. And the fact that it's extremely long is mostly covered up by its beauty, and it's never very boring when racing it online. It's a shame there's not more satisfying shortcuts than there are, but I'm still giving it a solid 7 out of 10. And finally, the longest track in all of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is Wii Rainbow Road. This is definitely one of the better Rainbow Road tracks with awesome graphics and music, as well as a few really cool shortcuts along the way. My main complaint about it is that the layout is just so darn long, even to the point that I often think the race is over after the second lap. Despite its obnoxious length, I can't ignore the fact that Wii Rainbow Road is a very solid track, and I give it a 6 out of 10. After adding up the ratings, the long tracks averaged 6.1 out of 10 points. So it was pretty close, but the longer tracks on average were a little bit better than the shorter ones. I think this has something to do with the amount of cool stuff that can be put into a track at once, and the longer tracks just have more room for fun and interesting elements. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and let me know if you want to see more content like this in the future, and I'll see you next time.